everybody.
Hi. Hi.
Thank you for coming to another New Songs for Butte Mining Camp Brown Bag Talk. This project is funded through a grant by the National Endowment for the Arts, and we are very lucky to have put on 14. Dylan is our 14th performer through this grant. And we appreciate all of your support. Thank you for coming out today. We have a concert tomorrow at the Chateau at 7 o'clock in the ballroom. If you would like to attend that, you can get tickets on our website or at the door. And today we're lucky to have Dylan Crane performing and talking about her research. Dylan.
Hi guys.
Hello.
Yeah, so my name is Dylan. I'm Dylan Crane. I'm a musician that's based out of Missoula. Just came down this morning. But I'm originally from Browning, Montana, sort of the heart of the Blackfeet Reservation. That's where I started playing music, and a lot of my music ties back to Browning specifically, and just in general, you know, through my indigenous lens. I'm really nervous if you can't. I think the origin of my nerves right now is that I'm not a historian, and when I first got the email asking me to do this project, I basically immediately said yes, and that's kind of an issue that I deal with, where I just say yes right away, and then find myself like okay, the gravity of my decisions hits me later, and also just like realizing too the artists that have performed and done this project before me, John Dendy and Aaron Jennings are like my heroes. So I've got some big shoes to fill, I think, right now. And so I came in about a month ago, spent a morning in the archives, and me and Morgan kind of talked about it a little bit, of like just like how intense it is to be holding the New Songs booklet, something that was, it's just, or not the booklet itself, the Emily's union member booklets, just knowing that she carried those around in her bag, and just like thinking about somebody so long ago experiencing Butte at such a tumultuous time, and being in the middle of it, was just really amazing. And I didn't stay. I could have stayed longer. And when I found myself in the weeks following, like referring back to the things that I had been learning and thinking about, just in like any conversation that allowed for the discussion of like the strikes and the unions, and it kind of started like burying its way into my head. And so I'm really big on finding, because of like the various kinds of lenses that I have to analyze a lot of things through, I'm big on finding the ways that these stories kind of overlap with each other, and how they share camaraderie. And so the way that I did this, primarily when I was very first asked, was going to be through like my indigenous lens, because I find myself having a lot of hesitancy for engaging, or engaging in conversations that have to do primarily with like American capitalism and the strife that results from that capitalism. And most of that comes from being indigenous. It's almost like a feeling of, me and Riley were talking about this, where it's like, it almost feels like, this is your problem. You brought this over. Which is, I mean, in theory, I'm sympathetic in a lot of ways, but I find myself not engaging very much. And one can only take so much sad history, so there's that too. And so with that in mind of like trying to find the ways that things overlap and share some sort of level of camaraderie, the very first thing that I appreciated about the nature of this project, before I even really delved into the specific history of the New Songs booklet and Frank Little and the IWW. So the nature of the project being one of like preservation and understanding, like recording these songs that had never been recorded before, preserving these lyrics and trying to capture what the ethos and emotion of these songs would have been at the time. And so the project itself really does sort of confront, understands the tragedy of losing things to time. And one of the ways that that really resonated with me and why I think that's just such a beautiful thing to do is language preservation is a really big preoccupation with me, and losing the Blackfeet language would be like such a loss, that preservation instinct and efforts are really moving to me. And in some ways this kind of did inspire the song that I ended up choosing. I chose the song The Worker's Answer. I did end up watching a few of the other brown bag videos just to kind of, not copy is the wrong word, inspiration. And I really did like, was it the Heidi Foggers that talked about Scotty and how all of these like there's one that says it's like written by a slave, and they're so anonymous. And I think that something that I really thought was interesting about their brown bag discussion was I think that anonymity of like kind of almost like pseudonym. It really speaks to like the ideology of these unions, that these songs didn't belong to a person, they belonged to everybody. They could have been anybody, anywhere. And so yeah, my song was just says by Gordon. Don't know who Gordon is, but I hope he approves wherever he is now. Let's see where am I. Man, Butte is crazy. It's so storied, and I often make the joke that if I walk into like an old building that's like over 100 years old and I touch the wall, I'll just start crying because it's intense when you think about how many stories exist, how much humanity has come and gone, and it's like every square inch of Butte makes me feel like that. So kind of going back to that thing of like find it like the ways that this story in this specific booklet and Frank Little and the IWW were sort of burrowing into my psyche. Weirdly enough, I recently changed my English concentration in school from film studies to creative writing. And I read one of the very first essays that I've read this week, or these past weeks as I started school again, was this essay by Lois Welch called Semi-Colonial Moments, that's talking about the history of the creative writing program. And this is where I found Ed Leahy and was like enamored by Ed Leahy. And there was that, just that like overlapping thing. It was like completely coincidental that I had been doing this research for this project and then also found Ed and just like the conversation about like marginality and community, even in the early 20th century. And I think that conversation about marginality, so Lois Welch was like kind of just referencing how at a certain point in our in Montana timeline, we were really we are still like really marginalized, even as Montanans. A lot of people like still consider Montana to be some sort of like frontier. And in her semi-colonial moments, she references Montana itself as like a semi-colony. And I think that kind of is really echoed by the Union stories. And I think that's where I started to find more sympathy, and sympathy is the wrong word because I feel like I've always been sympathetic to like the plight of the workers in Montana. I think that I just haven't had the opportunity to really let it connect, sink in, and become part of the way that I look at the world. So I hope I'm not rambling. I feel like I'm rambling. Let's see, where was I? Oh yeah, okay, so cool, yeah. When you really start digging into like that sentiment of marginality and what Butte was in the early 1900s, and then you start finding these like anti-war, anti-racist sentiments pop up, feminist sentiments pop up. It really brings into light how these workers weren't just like, for lack of a better word, bigots that were just like concerned with their own sort of like livelihood. There was the union workers being knowing that like the power in numbers, and when you hear stories about like Frank Little and just like the brutality of his murder, it calls to mind like things like the way that natives were treated, and natives and black people and immigrants all over Montana at that time, the way that they were treated. And there is so much, there's a lot more empathy and sympathy that I've discovered. And I think that one of the things that really drew me to Ed too was the way that he talks about Butte in this like love-hate sort of thing. And it really did remind me of my relationship to Browning, where there's so much history that's so brutal and depressing, and it leaves a town with a lot of broken and depressed people. But at the same time, that like perseverance and the willingness to like still stay in the town that you have such a difficult relationship with, because you see the beauty and community in that town, was really beautiful to me. And so it got me thinking about like when reading about Frank Little's death and how he was, his anti-war sentiments were so strong. He was like one of the only people at the time in those unions that was so vocal, because there were other people that thought it was, and I understand, right? There's no getting around that you have to be safe and you have to preserve the work that you're doing. And if that means you can't be so vehemently anti-war the way that Frank Little was, then you have to keep it on the down low, I guess. And so Frank Little being sort of just like, a lot of the things that I read seemed like there was a connection of him being his anti-war sentiments and his death and his murder. And it's a little bit, it's a dramatic feeling, but when you start to really think about like how this man was like putting himself in danger every single time he went out to organize these strikes and these unions. It makes you think about like what has the meaning of community and being part of a community, being part of a movement, how has that changed, and how much have we stopped being willing to commit to that community? And when you think about, so when I think about like Browning and when I think about Butte and this fight for equality and just being seen, I think is the thing that I really noticed too. That was another thing I really liked about the pettifoggers brown bag discussion was they were talking about the mules and the mules being like this really beautiful sort of like symbol in terms of like a poetic for what the like if we can see these animals in this sort of poetic way, that they have shifts and they have respect and they have a timeline of where they'll be released, right? But we can't do that with people. Like, what does that mean? And where have we gone wrong? Yeah, here, let me get back on track. Kind of gone all over the place. Oh, I got really interested in the difference between industrial unions and craft unions. So craft unions, I'm not a historian. I'm not an expert up here. I'm just very eager.
It's been interesting hearing your process.
Yeah.
You know, like everybody approaches this material differently. We've invited a lot of folks who are not traditionally a historian.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and they approach this project like an artist would.
Yeah.
And it's fun to hear like that process and like because this is how I'm not a traditional historian in the way a lot of folks who've done this project. So it reminds me of like how I would like oh, it's interesting. Like what are these relationships?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's one of those things too where I don't like the idea of telling other people's stories for them. And if I can find a way to connect to it with my own humanity, it's easier for me to sort of look at it as something to like dive into instead of like sort of objectively stare at Wikipedia pages for 10 hours. So yeah, the industrial unions and the craft unions, and the sort of like the divides within the unions was really interesting to me. It feels like it really echoes a lot of current sort of like socialist movements. There's a lot of rifts. So like the craft unions being something that reminds me a little bit more of like what we consider a union today. So like people of a similar trade or the same occupation having like a leader that negotiates with the bosses or the employers. And then industrial union being a lot more communist in my opinion, that there's, it was the nature of the workers' rights instead of like, and so that meant everybody. And so in that way, worker becomes more of its like own. What's the word I'm thinking of? Like its own specific descriptor that is like more inclusive. So like race or gender, or it becomes worker also becomes along that in those words, involved in those words. And yeah, I tried hard. I tried to look at this project in the way that I guess like a musician would, where I think about like the song itself and why specifically those lyrics stood out to me, and a lot of it had to do, and I'll play the song. I get that I'm referencing something that you guys haven't heard yet. Actually, maybe that'd be a good idea. Can I read you guys the lyrics of the song?
Sure.
that I chose. Let me find it. There it is. Okay. So it's called The Worker's Answer by Gordon, like I said. So these are the lyrics. We have fed you all for 1,000 years, and you hail us as yet unfed. There is not a dollar of all your wealth, but marks the workers dead. We have yielded our best to give you rest. You lie on crimson wool. If blood be the price of all your wealth, good God, we have paid in full. There is not a mine blow skyward now, but we are buried for you. There is not a wreck blow shoreward now, but we are its ghastly crew. Go reckon our dead by the forges red, and the factories where we spin. If blood be the price of all your wealth, good God, we have paid it in. We have fed you all for 1,000 years, but that was our doom, you know, from the time you chained us in the field to the strike of 5 months ago. You have eaten our lives, our babies, our wives, but that was your legal share. But if blood be the price of your legal wealth, good God, we have bought it fair. And I was trying to, so like, at the very offset, I was thinking about like what revolutionary songs mean to me, right? And I have like a love-hate relationship with them. I feel like a lot of the time when we think of like sort of like traditional revolutionary music, it's really, it's robust and it's set to like tunes that everybody knows, and it's, you know, can be shouted just as much as it can be sang. And I love that about them, but I also feel like they can have the tendency to become nationalistic and singular in their sort of like their drive and reasoning. And so I really appreciated this song because I feel like there's, one, I felt like it could have been written by an Indigenous person. It really, there's a lot of sentiments here that it just feels very, it resonates. And then two, it felt to me when I was looking through it, really taking in the lyrics, it sort of like tears at your heart a little bit. And I think that that sort of like emotional pull of like realizing the gravity of like these are lives that we're ruining, that these are lives, these are deaths that we that could have been prevented. And I always gravitate towards that kind of music a lot more. I think they're both equally as important when it comes to moving people. To have the like realize what's happening music kind of pulls down, you know, brings you back down to earth, and then the triumphant sort of, okay, now stand back up, right? And so I felt like I feel like that was something that I could deliver. I could deliver the sad ones. I'm better at the sad ones. My music tends to be a little bit sadder. If I make one person cry in my shows, I feel like I've done a good job. Yeah, and one of the other things that, just in that similar vein of like thinking about, like even saying just like I feel like this could be written by an Indigenous person, the sentiment there is one of like, it goes back to that marginality thing. It goes back to like once you know, if the underlying thing that's happening is that the big person is coming in and ruining the lives of the people that have no power, right? Just that story by itself, it's gonna apply to like many, many people across the board. And when it comes to finding the way that these relationships connecting the way that I can connect to them, Frank Little's anti-war stances, extremely, like just almost exactly the same as like Native opposition to war, of like we are not the little people that are going to go fight and die in a war that for a system that doesn't care about us. We have no reason to be patriotic. We have no reason to fight for you when you're stepping on us. And where was I? And that's something I just kept finding over and over again. Was that underlying story being influencing a lot of the same sort of sentiments within the unions and within Native ideology. How many of you, are you all from Butte? Yeah. Another thing that I kept thinking about was Riley, actually. The first time that he ever visited me when I was still living in Browning, he was telling me that all of his coworkers were like, don't go to Browning. Browning's too scary place over there. You're going to Browning? And I feel like Butte, unfortunately, has a really similar sort of sentiment from people. And so I have that sympathy too of just like, heck no, man. Someone's gonna ask you for money, but that's okay. Like, they're nice. So I think this would be a good time to share one of my songs that I've written. Talking about community, I feel like, so the most recent show that I played 2 songs before the 5 mayoral candidates in Missoula had a discussion. It was a weird gig, but I got paid for it, so that's all that really matters. But I played this song. I think it really speaks to loving where you come from, and I hope I'm in tune. That probably should have been something I did. Oh, that sounds right. And I think that's where a lot of this kind of stuff comes from. Being historians and being artists and being musicians, being activists comes from loving where you come from. And so I'm gonna sing a song about that.
Shape and sound, all the lost and all the found. Well, I'll build up a fire, I'll tend those trees, forage my food, burn the leaves just to find my way back around.
from. And also just sort of like about the how hard that can be sometimes, especially when you're learning about the history of it. And so that's so going back to like one of the reasons why I chose this song, or the main reason why I chose this song, where am I? My notes. Oh yeah, okay. So I kind of also had this spark of that I kept getting hooked on when I was trying to figure out what I wanted the song to sound like too, because I'm not a composer. I'm a songwriter, and I was trying to think of like how. Also, the fact that there's like no chorus in this song also really is really interesting because all of the rest of them basically have choruses, and these were those like big, like I was saying, like that big, grandiose, robust moments. I think. I mean, I picture that would be what it is. Maybe that's romantic, but this one doesn't, and so it really read to me more like a ballad of a sort. And I used to be in a band. I'm not in a band anymore. I'm just me and my guitar. If I had it my way, I think that I probably would have tried to do it on a piano. But what I kept thinking about was like how poetry, songs, and art, which is like, again, going back to the nature of this program and project, starting off with like this little booklet of songs, really are like the record-keeping acts of the emotions and the ethos of that time, because it's easy to like get sort of caught up, and I did get caught up in sort of like the dates and the images, trying to conjure up something from those. The images too can be so provocative, but I don't really think that they do a lot of justice to the emotions and the ethos of a given time. And I think that these kinds of, when you take into account like there are these songs that can have such sort of gravity and tenderness. I mean, like the line in here of like, you have eaten our lives, our babies and wives, but that was your legal share. And also just like, they do like refer to themselves as slaves in a lot of ways, or in a lot of moments in this book, and it's referenced in here, chained us in the fields. It's that camaraderie coming back over and over again, and so along with like the rousing anthems, these kinds of songs really complete the picture of a revolution in my mind, that there is a reason for all of this, and maybe that's common sense, but I felt like it needed to be a focal point for me. Yeah, so a lot of like the union, the strikes, like the Anaconda Copper Mining Company strike in 1920. Those are those things, that, like those stories that feel so obvious that it was going to happen in some terrible way. Like when you read the things coming up to it, leading up to it, and that's like horrifying to think about. That like something could be happening right in front of you, and you feel it in the air, and it's tense, and it's the tension of it all. But then it happens anyway. And like I said earlier, one person can only take so much sad history. And so when I say things like I have really, when I think about what my fight is, the history that I dive into is Indigenous history. And when you read about like massacres resulting from treaty violations, how that those very political decisions end up being the resulting thing being so bloody. And it's interesting, this is just a total aside that I just thought of just now. It's really interesting how I think when we think of like we have an idea in our head of like what gore and horror is when it comes to like serial killers or but I think that we politicize things like strikes and so there's like that disconnect that happens, and we don't really take a moment to think about how human and scary those things are. And so that's what this project really allowed me to do, was it gave me time to connect with it in a more human way, connect with the Butte history in a more human way. And I'm really grateful for that. I think that, and I've always loved Butte. I'm trying to convince Riley to go on a tour after this because we have a few hours to kill. But I've gone on so many tours here. I'm also a huge ghost nerd. I'm still waiting to find a ghost in Butte. But yeah, this project really gave me the time to humanize the history here, and yeah, and it makes me happy to know that if I can humanize this history, I think that I have a better shot at conveying what the song was originally meant to. So I'm gonna sing the song now. This is the part I'm scared of.
You got it. Thank you.
Yeah, it's like I said, I really realized that I'm not a composer. There's making it sound the way that I wanted it to was, and I have a hard time remembering my own lyrics, so the lyrics are in front of me. Yep, okay. Here's The Worker's Answer by Gordon.
We have fed you out for 1,000 years, and you hail us as yet unfed. There is not a dollar for all your wealth, but marks the workers dead. We have yielded our best to give you rest. You lie on crimson wool, and if blood be the price of all your wealth, good God, we have paid in full. There is not a mind blow skyward now, but we are buried with. There is not a wreck blow shoreward now, but we are its ghastly crew. Go reckon our dead by the forages red, and the factories where we spin. But if blood be the price of all your wealth, good God, we have paid it in. We have fed you out for 1,000 years, when we chained us in the fields to the strike of 5 months ago. You have eaten our lives, our babies, our wives, but that was your legal share. But if blood be the price of your legal wealth, good God, we have bought it fair. Good God, we have bought it fair.
So, Gordon, hope you liked it. But yeah, that was my experience with this project. And I know that I really did kind of go for the more emotional side of this than the hard facts. But that's why I'm doing a creative writing degree, because that's what I connect with. But yeah, thank you guys for coming. Thanks for listening.
Does anybody have any questions for me?
Well, I just have a comment.
Yeah.
I appreciated your ideas and your thoughts and stuff, and especially since this valley basically was a large hunting ground where all the indigenous tribes would come to hunt, and then it's so scarred, by the mining.
Mm-hmm.
Just like to have you throw that in your little think box for a little bit.
Yeah, no,
Come back with
absolutely.
a creative writing process.
Yeah.
You girls get to work on that.
Well, we
Second
are working
phase.
on a book, so. Any other questions or
Comments?
Well, thank you so
Yeah,
much
thank
for your
you.
Thank you.